Sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the first page of a story you never saw coming. This is the story of a man who had everything and 7 days to keep it. But what he didn't know was that saving his fortune would cost him something far more valuable: his heart. Before we begin, please subscribe right away. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Thomas Brennan was 34 years old when he learned that his entire life was built on a lie. He sat in the mahogany office of his family's lawyer, Marcus Webb, staring at a letter written in his grandfather's handwriting. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched out below like a kingdom he was about to lose. "Read it again," Thomas whispered. Marcus adjusted his glasses, his voice steady but sad. "Thomas, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And you've just learned the truth about the Brennan fortune. Son, I built this empire from nothing, but I also made a promise to someone long ago, a promise I broke. The woman I loved, I left her, chose money over her heart. It destroyed her, destroyed me too, in ways I never fixed. So here's my final wish. You have 7 days from your 34th birthday to find a wife. A real marriage. Not a contract. Not a business deal. A partnership. Someone you choose to build a life with. If you fail, everything goes to charity. Every dollar. Every building. Every dream. Don't make my mistake. Thomas. Don't die alone with money but no love. You have 7 days. Starting now." Thomas sat frozen. 7 days. 168 hours to find a wife or lose $300 million. Most men would panic. Most men would scheme. Most men would find the nearest woman and throw money at the problem. But Thomas just felt tired. He walked to the window, pressed his palm against the cold glass. "He really did this," Thomas said softly. "He really made it impossible." Marcus stood. "Your grandfather was a complicated man. He was a coward," Thomas said, voice breaking. "He ran from love his whole life. And now he wants me to find it in a week? Like it's something you can just schedule between meetings." "Maybe," Marcus said quietly, "he wants you to learn what he never did. That some things are worth more than winning." That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse apartment, 43rd floor, 3 bedrooms he never used, a kitchen where he never cooked, and realized something terrible. He had no one to call. No girlfriend. No ex who might understand. No woman in his life who knew him as anything more than Thomas Brennan, CEO. His phone had 400 contacts, business partners, investors, people who wanted things from him, but no one who actually knew him. Drop a comments if you've ever felt this kind of lonely, the kind where you're surrounded by people, but completely alone. Day 2 began the way all disasters do. With coffee. Thomas walked into Rosewood Coffee, a tiny shop 2 blocks from his office that he'd passed 10,000 times but never entered. Why would he? His assistant brought him coffee. Double espresso, no sugar, exact temperature. But today he needed to think. And he needed to be somewhere that wasn't drowning in the weight of his grandfather's impossible demand. The shop smelled like cinnamon and old books, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu written in careful handwriting, morning light coming through windows that actually opened. It felt human. Thomas ordered coffee, stood awkwardly by the counter because every table was taken except one in the corner where a woman sat with a notebook, writing so intensely she didn't notice the world around her. "Excuse me," Thomas said. "Is this seat?" She looked up. And that's when everything changed. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in that quiet way that sneaks up on you. Brown eyes that looked like they'd seen storms, but chose kindness anyway. Dark hair, pulled back messy. like she'd forgotten to check a mirror and didn't care. No, everything changed because of what she said next. "You look like you're about to jump off a bridge," she said. "Sit, talk, or don't. But you look like you need to be near someone who isn't going to ask you for anything." Thomas blinked. "You don't even know me." "Exactly." She moved her notebook. "That's why you can sit." Her name was Sophie. Sophie Grant, 29 years old. Part-time barista, part-time writer, full-time trying to figure out what her life was supposed to mean. She didn't recognize him, didn't know about Brennan Industries or the Fortune 500 list or any of it. To her, he was just a tired man in an expensive suit who looked lost. And somehow, that was exactly what Thomas needed. "What are you writing?" he asked after a long silence. Sophie smiled. "Small, private. Stories about people who are braver than me." "What would make you brave?" She looked at him, then really looked, believing that starting over isn't the same as giving up. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, coffee preferences, favorite books neither of them had time to read, the way the city looked different at sunrise. Thomas didn't mention his deadline, his inheritance, the clock ticking down in his head. He just talked like a normal person for the first time in years. And when Sophie's phone buzzed and she had to leave for her shift at the bookstore, Thomas did something he hadn't planned. "Can I see you again?" he asked. Sophie paused at the door. "Why?" "Because," Thomas said honestly, "you're the first person in 2 days who hasn't looked at me like I'm a problem to solve." She studied him, then wrote something on a napkin and slid it across the table. A phone number. "Tomorrow. Same time." But Thomas, she'd seen his credit card when he paid. Whatever you're running from, you can't outrun it by sitting in coffee shops. And then she was gone. That night, Thomas stared at the napkin. He had 5 days left. 5 days to find a wife or lose everything. And he'd just spent 40 minutes with a woman who made him forget that any of it mattered. Day 3. Thomas showed up at Rosewood Coffee at exactly 7:47 a.m., 3 minutes earlier than yesterday, which he told himself didn't mean anything. Sophie was already there. Same corner table. But this time, she wasn't writing. She was staring out the window with an expression Thomas recognized. The look of someone trying to solve an impossible equation. "Bad morning," he asked, setting down 2 coffees. Sophie glanced at the cup. "You remember my order?" "Vanilla latte, extra foam, cinnamon." Thomas sat. "I'm good at details." "That," Sophie said softly, "or you actually listened." They fell into conversation easier this time. Sophie told him about the bookstore where she worked, 8,000 pages, owned by an old woman named Mrs. Chun who was 92 and still climbed ladders to reach the top shelves. "She says books on high shelves are more magical," Sophie explained, "because you have to work to reach them, and anything worth having should require a little climb." Thomas smiled. "Sounds like she and my grandfather would have gotten along." Was he wise? He was complicated. Thomas almost told her then about the will, the deadline, the impossible choice. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way Sophie looked at him, like he was just Thomas, not Thomas Brennan, heir to a fortune. Maybe it was that for the first time in years, he felt like a person instead of a position. Or maybe he was already starting to care what she thought of him. And he knew that the moment she learned about the 7 days, everything would change. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said suddenly. "Anything. Why do you look so sad?" Thomas froze. No one asked him that. Ever. People asked if he was stressed, busy, tired. But sad, He stopped. Started again. "I'm about to lose something. Something I built my whole life around. And I don't know if I'm sad about losing it, or sad that I'm not sure I ever wanted it in the first place. Sophie reached across the table, didn't take his hand, just let her fingers rest near his, close enough to be a comfort, far enough to be a choice. Then maybe, she whispered, losing it is the gift. They sat like that for a long time. Two strangers who weren't strangers anymore. Two people carrying weight they didn't know how to set down. And then Sophie's phone rang. She looked at the screen, and something in her face crumbled. I have to go, she said, standing quickly. I'm sorry. Sophie, wait. But she was already moving toward the door, and Thomas saw something he hadn't noticed before. Her hands were shaking. He caught up to her outside. What's wrong? Nothing. I have something I need to handle. Let me help. You can't. Her voice broke. Thomas, you seem like a good person. But you don't know me. You don't know what She stopped, took a breath. When she looked at him again, her eyes were wet. I need to go. And this time, he let her. Thomas stood on the sidewalk as Sophie disappeared into the crowd. 4 days left. 96 hours to find a wife. And he'd just spent another morning with a woman he couldn't stop thinking about, who was clearly running from something just as hard as he was. His phone buzzed. Marcus! Thomas, we need to talk. The board is asking questions. You need a plan. But Thomas was already walking, following the direction Sophie had gone, even though he knew he shouldn't, even though it was none of his business, because something told him that whatever Sophie was facing, it was connected to why she understood him so completely. Thomas found her at City General Hospital. He almost didn't go in, almost turned around. But then he saw her through the glass doors, sitting in the waiting room, head in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent tears. And he couldn't leave. Sophie. She looked up. Shock. Then something like anger. You followed me? You were upset. I was worried. You don't get to worry about me. You don't. Her voice broke. You don't know me, Thomas. Then tell me. And in that sterile hospital waiting room, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the smell of antiseptic in the air, Sophie told him the truth. My sister, Rachel. She's 14. She has leukemia. Sophie's voice was hollow. We found out 2 years ago. Thought we beat it. But it came back 6 months ago. And this time the treatment she needs isn't covered by insurance. It's experimental. Expensive. How expensive? $270,000. Thomas felt like he'd been punched. I've been working 3 jobs, Sophie continued. Bookstore, coffee shop, freelance writing at night. I've sold everything I own. Asked everyone I know. I'm at 63,000, which sounds like a lot until you realize how far away I still am. She looked at him with eyes that had cried too many tears. So that's why I write about brave people, Thomas, because I'm not brave. I'm just desperate and terrified. And so tired of watching my baby sister suffer while I can't do anything to save her. Thomas sat down slowly. 4 days left on his deadline. $300 million about to disappear. And a woman he barely knew who needed a fraction of that fortune to save someone's life. The math was simple. The choice was impossible. Let me help, Thomas said quietly. No. Sophie, no. She stood. I didn't tell you this, so you'd rescue me. I told you because you asked. But I don't need a hero, Thomas. I need a miracle. And those don't exist. What if they do? Sophie laughed, bitter, broken. Then I'd ask why mine is taking so long. A doctor called Sophie's name. She wiped her eyes, put on a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her heart, and walked toward the doors. Before she went through, she turned back. Don't come here again. Thomas, whatever you're dealing with, whatever impossible thing you're facing. I can't be your distraction from it, and you can't be my hope. Hope hurts too much when it leaves. The doors closed, and Thomas sat alone, knowing exactly what he had to do, even if it destroyed him. Emotional music peaks. That night, Thomas called Marcus. I need you to draft a contract, he said. What kind of contract? A marriage proposal. Thomas, what are you? I'm going to ask Sophie to marry me, not because I want to trap her, not because I'm manipulating the will, but because I'm going to offer her something she can't refuse, which is everything. Music stops. Comment genius or mistake right now, because what Thomas is about to do will either save them both or destroy any chance they ever had at something real. Day 4. Thomas didn't go to Rosewood Coffee. He went to a 1,000 Pages bookstore, found Sophie restocking shelves in the back, standing on a ladder just like Mrs. Chun had taught her, reaching for the magic on the high shelves. We need to talk, Thomas said. Sophie didn't look down. I thought I told you. I'm going to say something, and you're going to think I'm crazy, but I need you to listen to the whole thing before you decide. She climbed down slowly, crossed her arms. I'm listening. Thomas took a breath. My grandfather died and left me $300 million. But there's a condition. I have to get married in 7 days, 3 days now, or I lose everything. Not to another person. To charity. All of it. Gone. Sophie's eyes widened. Thomas. Wait. Let me finish. He pulled out a folder. Here's what I'm proposing. Marry me. Right now, this week. I'll give you $270,000 immediately for Rachel's treatment. No strings. Whether we stay married or not, that money is yours. And when the year is up, because the will requires we stay married for 1 year, you walk away with another $5 million. Free and clear. Sophie stared at him. You're serious? Completely. You want to buy a wife? No. Thomas stepped closer. I want to offer a solution to 2 impossible problems. You need money you don't have. I need a marriage I didn't plan for. We can help each other. This is insane. I know. You don't even know me. I know enough, Thomas said softly. I know you'd work yourself to death for someone you love. I know you're kind to strangers in coffee shops. I know you make me feel like I'm more than just the sum of my bank account. And I know that if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to marry someone to keep my grandfather's fortune, I'd rather it be someone who actually deserves it. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Why are you really doing this? She whispered. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Because when you asked me why I looked sad, you were the first person who saw me. Not my name. Not my money. Just me. And maybe that's not love. Maybe it's not even close. But it's more real than anything else in my life right now. He held out the folder. I'm not asking you to love me, Sophie. I'm asking you to let me help you save your sister. And maybe in the process, we save each other. Sophie took the folder with shaking hands. Read the contract, the numbers, the terms. $270,000. Immediate transfer. Rachel's treatment. A chance at life. This is a business deal, she said finally. Yes. We'd be strangers living together. Yes. I don't love you. I know. She looked at him. Then why does this feel like the most honest proposal anyone's ever made? Thomas smiled, sad, small, real. Because it is. Sophie closed her eyes. Thought of Rachel in that hospital bed. Thought of 2 more years of drowning in debt and terror. Thought of a stranger who looked at her like she mattered. And she thought of something Mrs. Chun once said, sometimes the magic isn't in the destination. It's in the climb. Okay, Sophie whispered. Okay. Yes. She opened her eyes. Yes, Thomas Brennan. I'll marry you. Music swells, hopeful but uncertain. They were married 48 hours later. City Hall. 2 witnesses, Marcus and Mrs. Chun. 5-minute ceremony. Rings bought from a vintage shop 3 blocks away because there wasn't time for anything else. Sophie wore a simple dress. Thomas wore the same suit he'd worn to his grandfather's funeral. And when the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," they looked at each other awkwardly. 2 strangers playing at something sacred. Thomas leaned in, kissed her cheek. A promise, not of love, but of honoring the strange, impossible arrangement they'd made. "We did it," Sophie breathed. "We did it," Thomas agreed. The money transferred that afternoon. Sophie called the hospital from Thomas's apartment, her apartment now, technically, and told them to start Rachel's treatment. She cried for 20 minutes. Relief, terror, gratitude, guilt, and Thomas sat across the room, giving her space, wondering what he'd just done. Soft music. Living together was strange. Thomas gave Sophie the master bedroom. He took the guest room. They established rules. Separate spaces. Separate schedules. They'd appear together for any legal requirements or public events. Otherwise, they lived like roommates who barely knew each other. Professional, distant, safe. But proximity has a way of breaking down walls you didn't know you'd built. Week 2. Sophie got up at 5 a.m. to call the hospital before Rachel's morning treatment. Thomas heard her through the walls, the careful hope in her voice, the way she pretended everything was fine even when Rachel could barely speak. He started making coffee before she woke up, left it outside her door, never mentioned it. She started leaving post-it notes on the bathroom mirror. Small things. "The city looks beautiful at sunrise from the window," or "Thank you for the coffee." They never discussed it, but the notes kept appearing. Week 3. Thomas had a business dinner. Black tie. Investors he needed to impress. "I need you to come," he told Sophie. "As my wife. It's in the contract." Sophie, who'd been living in jeans and sweaters, looked panicked. "I don't have anything to wear to something like that." Thomas hesitated, then pulled out a credit card. "Buy whatever you need." "I can't. It's not a gift. It's a costume for the role we're playing." Sophie showed up to the dinner in a midnight blue dress that made Thomas forget how to breathe. She was nervous, fidgeting with her clutch, but she smiled at his business partners, asked thoughtful questions, and somehow made the whole evening feel less like a performance and more like something real. In the car afterward, Thomas said quietly, "You were perfect. I was terrified. You didn't show it." Sophie looked at him. "Maybe we're both better actors than we thought." But it was the small moments that began to matter most. Thomas worked late. Sophie would fall asleep on the couch reading, and he'd find her there at midnight. He'd drape a blanket over her. Never woke her. Just made sure she was warm. Sophie started cooking dinner, sometimes. Never asked if Thomas wanted any. Just left a plate in the fridge with his name on a post-it. "Eat something. You look tired." They'd sit in the same room now, not talking, just existing together. Sophie writing in her notebook. Thomas reviewing contracts. Comfortable silence stretching between them like a language they were learning to speak. Week 5. Rachel's treatment was working. Sophie got the call while Thomas was in a meeting. She screamed, actually screamed, with joy. And when Thomas came running out of his office, terrified something was wrong, she grabbed him, hugged him. Not a polite hug, a real one, desperate and grateful and full of every emotion she'd been holding back. "She's responding," Sophie sobbed into his shoulder. "Thomas, she's actually getting better." And Thomas held her, really held her, felt her heartbeat against his chest, her tears soaking through his shirt, her relief and terror and hope all tangled together. "I told you," he whispered. "Miracles exist." Emotional music. That night, they sat on the balcony, city lights below, cool air. Sophie wrapped in one of Thomas's jackets because she'd forgotten hers. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said softly. "Anything. Why didn't you just find someone else? Someone from your world. Someone who'd make this easier." Thomas was quiet for a long time. "Because everyone in my world wants something from me. Position, access, money, but you—" He looked at her. "You didn't even know who I was. And when you found out, you didn't care about any of it. You just saw a person who needed help, same as you did. So this was gratitude." "No." Thomas shook his head. "This was hope. That maybe, just maybe, I could be the kind of man who deserves someone like you in his life, even if it's just pretend." Sophie reached over, took his hand. Not for show. No cameras. No audience. Just two people who'd started as strangers and were becoming something neither of them had words for yet. "It doesn't feel like pretend anymore," Sophie whispered. Thomas laced their fingers together. "No, it doesn't." Comment a red heart if you're feeling this moment, because what they don't know is someone's been watching, and the life they're building is about to be tested in ways they never imagined. Week 7. Thomas came home to find Sophie staring at her laptop, face pale. "What's wrong?" She turned the screen toward him. It was a news article. Headline: Brennan heirs suspicious marriage. Love or loophole? The article detailed their quick wedding, questioned the timing, suggested that Thomas had manufactured a marriage to circumvent his grandfather's will. And worse, it had photos of them at the business dinner, at coffee shops, outside the hospital. Someone had been following them. "Thomas," Sophie whispered, "they're saying we're committing fraud." "We're not." "But we are." She stood panicking. "We got married for money. That's literally what happened. And now someone knows and they're going to—" "Sophie, breathe." "I can't. If they prove this is fake, Rachel loses her treatment. I lose the money. You lose everything. We." Thomas grabbed her shoulders. Gently. "Look at me." She did, eyes wild with fear. "This is my fault," Thomas said. "I put you in this position. And I will fix it." "How?" Thomas's phone rang. "Marcus, we have a problem," Marcus said without preamble. "Your grandfather's former business partner, Victor Kane, is challenging the will. He's claiming your marriage is a sham. If he proves it, the inheritance goes to him instead of charity. And he's got lawyers, Thomas. Expensive ones." Thomas closed his eyes. "Of course he does. There's a hearing in 2 weeks. You need to prove your marriage is legitimate, real, not a contract. How do we do that?" "You'll have to convince a judge that you and Sophie are genuinely in love." Thomas hung up, looked at Sophie, who'd heard every word. "We have to convince a courtroom that we're in love," Thomas said hollowly. "In 2 weeks." Sophie sank onto the couch. "But we're not." "I know. We're friends. Maybe. Who live together." "Who?" She stopped, because even saying it out loud felt like a lie. Were they just friends? Friends didn't notice the way someone smiled at small kindnesses, didn't memorize coffee orders and favorite books, didn't hold hands on balconies under starlight for no reason except it felt right. Friends didn't look at each other the way Thomas was looking at Sophie right now. "What if we can't prove it?" Sophie whispered. "Then we lose everything." "I can't. Thomas, I can't let Rachel lose her treatment because You won't." Thomas knelt in front of her. "Whatever happens, Rachel keeps getting her medicine. I'll make sure of it, even if I have to sell everything I own. You do that, without hesitation. Sophie touched his face. Soft, careful, like he was something precious she was afraid to break. When did this stop being fake? She asked. Thomas leaned into her palm. I don't think it ever was. They didn't kiss. Not yet, because some moments are too important to rush. Instead, they sat together on that couch, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, knowing that in 2 weeks they'd have to stand in front of strangers and prove that what they felt was real. And the terrifying thing was they weren't sure they could. Not because it wasn't true, but because neither of them had ever let themselves believe in something this impossible before. The next morning, a letter arrived. Sophie opened it with shaking hands. It was from Victor Kane himself. Dear Mrs. Brennan, I know what you are, a gold digger who saw an opportunity. And I'm going to prove it. When I do, you'll lose everything, the money, the lifestyle, the fantasy you've been living. But here's my offer. Leave now. Annul the marriage. Walk away with the money you've already received. And I'll drop the investigation. Stay, and I'll destroy you both. You have 1 week to decide. Choose wisely. Sophie read it 3 times, then handed it to Thomas without a word. He read it, face hardening with every line. He's trying to scare you, Thomas said. It's working. Sophie, maybe he's right. Her voice broke. Maybe I am exactly what he says. Someone who took advantage of. Stop. Thomas grabbed her hand. Don't let him make you doubt this. Us. Whatever this is. But what if we lose? Then we lose together. Sophie looked at Thomas. This man she'd known for 7 weeks. This stranger who'd become her home. I'm not leaving, she said quietly, even if it costs you everything. Even then. Because here's what Sophie had learned in those 7 weeks. Some things are worth more than safety, more than guarantees, more than knowing how the story ends. Some things are worth the climb. Type fight in the comments if you think they should go to that hearing and prove their love is real. Because in the next part, everything they've built is about to be tested. And the truth they discover about each other might be the very thing that saves them or destroys them completely. 10 days until the hearing. Marcus gathered them in Thomas's office with a lawyer named Diana Ross. No relation to the singer, she always clarified, but yes, she'd heard all the jokes. Here's what's going to happen, Diana said, laying out folders. Victor Kane's team will try to prove your marriage is transactional. They'll point to the timeline, the money, the contract. They'll paint Sophie as an opportunist and Thomas as a desperate heir trying to cheat the system. Sounds accurate. Sophie muttered. Diana ignored her. Our job is to prove intent, that you married with the genuine intention of building a life together. That money was secondary to connection. How? Thomas asked. We show the jury who you are. As a couple, Diana pulled out photos, social media, public appearances, testimony from friends and family. Sophie and Thomas exchanged glances. We don't have any of that, Sophie said. We've been living quietly, just the two of us. Then we created. And so began the strangest week of their lives. Marcus orchestrated photo opportunities, dinner reservations at romantic restaurants where photographers just happened to be, walks through parks, coffee dates at Rosewood, the place they'd met, staged for social media posts that Sophie's friends would share. It felt wrong, like they were faking the very thing that had become real. I hate this, Sophie said after their third scheduled, candid photo shoot. They sat on a bench by the river, cameras gone, just them and the water. Me too, Thomas admitted. We're turning something true into a performance. I know. Sophie turned to him. Tell me something real. Something I don't know. Something you haven't told anyone. Thomas was quiet for a long time. My grandfather, he finally said, he died alone in a hospital room. And I wasn't there. I was in a meeting, negotiating a deal that meant nothing. And by the time I got the call, he was already gone. His voice cracked. I never got to tell him. I understood why he put that condition in the will. He wasn't trying to punish me. He was trying to save me from becoming him, from choosing work over life, money over love, success over meaning. Sophie took his hand. And now, Thomas continued, I'm doing exactly what he feared, turning even marriage into a transaction, a strategy, something to win instead of something to live. Thomas, he'd be so disappointed. Sophie squeezed his hand. Or maybe he'd see that you're trying, that you took a gamble on something impossible because it felt right, and that's braver than playing it safe ever could be. Thomas looked at her. You always do that. Do what? Make me believe I'm better than I actually am. Sophie smiled. That's because you are. You just forgot. That night, back at the apartment, Thomas found Sophie in the kitchen at 2 a.m. She was baking cookies, badly, based on the smoke alarm she'd had to fan into silence. Can't sleep. Thomas asked, Rachel's MRI is tomorrow. Results in 2 days. I keep thinking about. She trailed off. Everything. Thomas washed his hands, picked up a mixing bowl. My mother used to bake when she was worried. He said, quietly, chocolate chip cookies. She said the recipe was simple enough that you couldn't overthink it. You just had to follow the steps and trust the process. Sophie looked at him. I didn't know your mother baked. She died when I was 12. Cancer. Thomas measured flour, movements careful. My grandfather raised me after that, threw himself into work, taught me to do the same, said emotions were distractions, weakness. Thomas, I haven't baked since she died, he continued. Couldn't. It hurt too much. But watching you tonight, trying so hard to do something normal while your world feels like it's falling apart, I remembered that some things are worth the hurt. They baked together in silence, measured ingredients, mixed dough, Sophie's hands shaking slightly, Thomas guiding them steady when she needed it. And when they pulled the first batch from the oven, golden, imperfect, filling the apartment with warmth, Sophie started crying. They're awful, she laughed through tears. They're burnt on the bottom and raw in the middle, and they're perfect, Thomas said. He pulled her into his arms. A real embrace. No audience. No cameras. Just two people holding each other, because the world was too heavy to carry alone. I'm scared, Sophie whispered against his chest. Of the hearing? Of everything. Of losing Rachel. Of losing you. Of this. She pulled back to look at him. Whatever this is between us. Because it started as a lie, but it doesn't feel like one anymore. And I don't know what to call it, and that terrifies me. Thomas cupped her face, thumbs wiping away tears. Then let's not call it anything yet, he said softly. Let's just be it, whatever it becomes. Sophie searched his eyes, saw something there she'd been too afraid to name. And then, finally, she kissed him. It wasn't desperate or dramatic. It was soft, questioning, a conversation without words. Is this real? Yes. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. When they pulled apart, foreheads resting together, Sophie whispered, we can't do this. I know. The hearing. If they think we're only just now falling in love, it'll prove Cain right. I know. But I can't unfeel this. Thomas smiled, sad, honest. Neither can I. They stood in that kitchen, surrounded by burnt cookies and the ruins of their careful plans, and made a choice, not to deny what they felt, but to protect it, to keep it private, sacred, until they could prove to the world that their marriage was real. They'd keep the depth of their feelings hidden, a secret between them, the most important kind. The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray. Thomas wore his best suit. Sophie wore a dress Diana had chosen, elegant, understated, the kind of thing a woman in love would wear to fight for her marriage. The courtroom was smaller than Sophie expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a judge who looked like someone's tired grandfather, and Victor Kane, sitting across the aisle with his lawyers. Silver hair, expensive suit, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Nervous? Thomas whispered, terrified. He took her hand under the table, squeezed once. We've got this. Kane's lawyer went first. A woman named Patricia Chun, no relation to Mrs. Chun, thankfully, who had the kind of voice that could cut through steel. Your Honor, this case is simple. Thomas Brennan needed a wife to claim his inheritance. Sophie Grant needed money for her sister's medical treatment. They created a contract. She held up papers, a literal written agreement exchanging marriage for financial compensation. The judge looked over his glasses. That's not illegal. No, Your Honor, but it violates the spirit of the will. Henry Brennan wanted his grandson to find genuine love, not a business transaction dressed up as romance. Patricia turned to Sophie. Mrs. Brennan, when did you first learn about Thomas's inheritance deadline? Sophie's heart hammered. The day he told me about it. Which was when? 4 days after we met. 4 days. Patricia smiled. And how long after that did you agree to marry him? 2 days. So, you knew this man for less than a week before accepting his marriage proposal. A proposal that came with $270,000 immediate payment and $5 million upon completing 1 year of marriage. Objection, Diana stood. Characterization. I'll rephrase. Mrs. Brennan, did you marry Thomas Brennan because you loved him? Sophie looked at Thomas, saw the tension in his jaw, the fear in his eyes. Tell the truth, they'd agreed. But not all of it. Not yet. I married him, Sophie said carefully, because he offered me hope when I had none. Because he saw me. Not my desperation, not my need, but who I was as a person. And yes, the money mattered. My sister was dying, but Thomas mattered more. That's a lovely speech, Patricia said, but you didn't answer my question. Did you love him when you married him? The courtroom went silent. Sophie's hands trembled. I didn't know him well enough to love him yet, but I knew I wanted to, and that felt like enough. Your Honor, Patricia turned to the judge. The defendant admits she didn't love Thomas Brennan when she married him. This is exactly the kind of arrangement Henry Brennan's will was designed to prevent. Diana stood for their defense, called Thomas to the stand. He looked calm, composed, every inch the CEO. Mr. Brennan, Diana began, why did you choose Sophie Grant as your wife? Thomas's eyes found Sophie in the courtroom. Because when I was drowning, she taught me how to breathe again. Can you elaborate? I spent my life chasing my grandfather's approval, building his empire, becoming the heir he wanted. But I forgot to become a person along the way. And Sophie, she reminded me what that felt like. But you offered her money. Yes. Why? Thomas leaned forward. Because I had resources she needed, and she had something I needed more. Not a wife for the will, but a reason to believe that maybe I was worth something beyond my bank account. Patricia stood for cross-examination. Mr. Brennan, if there was no inheritance deadline, would you have married Sophie? Thomas paused. I don't know. You don't know. The deadline forced me to take a chance I might not have taken otherwise. To risk something. To be brave. So would I have married her without it? Maybe not. But would I have fallen in love with her anyway? Yes. Absolutely yes. Murmurs in the courtroom. Patricia pressed. You claim to love her now. I do. When did that happen? When did a business arrangement become love? Thomas looked at Sophie. I think it was always becoming love. I just didn't recognize it until I couldn't imagine my life without her. How convenient, Patricia said dryly. Mr. Brennan, isn't it true that you've only been seen in public together for the past 2 weeks? Staged photos, scheduled appearances, a social media campaign. Yes, because you needed to manufacture evidence of a real relationship. No, Thomas said firmly, because we'd been living our relationship privately, and when it was threatened, we had to show the world what we'd been building in silence. The judge called for a recess. Sophie and Thomas sat in a side room, not speaking. Diana paced, reviewing notes. It's not going well, Sophie whispered. We knew it wouldn't be easy. Thomas, what if? The door opened. Marcus rushed in, face pale. We have a problem. Kane's team just submitted new evidence. Phone records. The contract. And he hesitated. Text messages between you two from the first week. About the arrangement. Sophie's blood ran cold. Those messages. The practical discussions about money, terms, logistics. Before they'd started leaving post-it notes. Before cookies and coffee and quiet mornings. Evidence of exactly what Kane claimed they were. A transaction. Can they use those? Thomas asked. They already are, Marcus said. The judge is reviewing them now. When court resumed, the energy had shifted. The judge looked somber. Kane looked victorious. And Patricia stood with a stack of printed text messages. Your Honor, these messages prove definitively that this marriage was a business transaction. On day 2, Mr. Brennan writes, 270,000 immediately, 5 million after 1 year. Your own bank account. No access required. Mrs. Brennan responds, and if we want to end it sooner? Mr. Brennan, divorce after 1 year. Clean break. You keep everything. The judge frowned. Mr. Brennan? Thomas stood slowly. Those messages are real. That conversation happened. So, you admit this was a financial arrangement. It started as one. Yes. Gasps in the courtroom. Diana looked panicked. Sophie closed her eyes. And Thomas kept talking. My grandfather died and left me an impossible task. Find real love in 7 days or lose everything. And I was angry, bitter, because he'd spent his whole life running from love. And now he wanted me to find it on a deadline. Thomas's voice cracked. So yes, I approached it like a business deal. Because that's all I knew how to do. I found a woman who needed help, made an offer, created a contract, convinced myself I was being practical. Mr. Brennan. But here's what I didn't expect, Thomas continued, looking directly at Sophie now. I didn't expect her to remember how I take my coffee, to leave notes that made me smile, to sit with me in silence when words were too hard, to teach me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you're broken. I didn't expect to start waking up early just so I could see her before she called the hospital, to memorize the books she loved, to feel like I could breathe for the first time in years because she made me believe I was more than what I'd inherited. Thomas's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I didn't expect to fall in love with her. The courtroom was silent. So, yes, Your Honor, this marriage started as a contract, but it became something real, something I never knew I needed. And if loving someone you chose, rather than someone who chose you for your money, isn't real, then I don't know what is. The judge studied him. Mrs. Brennan, do you have anything to add? Sophie stood on shaking legs. I have something to confess, she said quietly. Diana looked alarmed. Sophie, when Thomas proposed, I said yes for the money. That's true. Rachel was dying, and I was desperate, and he offered me a miracle. She took a breath. But the real reason I said yes is because when he looked at me in that bookstore, I felt seen for the first time in years. Not as Rachel's sister, not as someone tragic or pitiful, but as Sophie, a person with dreams and fears and worth. Sophie's voice shook, and I was so tired of being invisible. So when he offered me money, yes, I took it. But when he offered me himself, even in this strange, impossible way, I took that too, because I thought maybe, just maybe, I deserved something good, even if I had to pay for it. Tears streamed down her face now. But here's what I learned. Love isn't something you pay for. It's something you build. One coffee at a time. One burned cookie. One quiet morning. One moment of choosing to stay, when leaving would be easier. She looked at Thomas. And I choose you, not because of money, not because of contracts, but because you made me believe in miracles again. And the biggest miracle of all. Her voice broke. Is that someone like you could love someone like me? The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Order! But Sophie wasn't done. She walked across the courtroom to Thomas, took his hands. I love you, she said. I don't care who hears it. I don't care if it costs us everything. I love you, Thomas Brennan. Not your money, not your name. You. Thomas pulled her close, kissed her forehead. I love you too. Emotional music swells. The judge cleared his throat. I'm going to ask everyone except the attorneys and principals to leave. Now, the courtroom cleared. Just the judge, the lawyers, Sophie, Thomas, and Kane remained. This is highly irregular, the judge said, but so is this entire case. He looked at Kane. Mr. Kane, you've made compelling arguments. The timeline is suspicious. The contract is damning. And yet, he turned to Sophie and Thomas. I've been a judge for 30 years. I've seen every kind of marriage. Arranged marriages. Marriages of convenience. Marriages built on love that crumbled. And marriages built on necessity that bloomed. What I see here is two people who found each other in unusual circumstances, made pragmatic choices, but somewhere along the way built something genuine. Is it perfect? No. But Henry Brennan didn't ask for perfect. He asked for real. The judge shuffled papers. The will states Thomas must marry with genuine intention to build a life together. I believe that intention exists. Whether it existed at the ceremony or developed after, that's between them and whatever they believe about love. He signed a document. Inheritance approved. The marriage stands. Case dismissed. Sophie gasped. Thomas exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for months. Kane stood furiously. Your Honor, this is final, the judge said firmly. Mr. Kane, you challenged this marriage out of greed, not principle. And that tells me everything I need to know about who deserved Henry Brennan's fortune. These two people, he gestured to Sophie and Thomas. They're fighting for each other. You were fighting for yourself. Case dismissed. They walked out of that courtroom hand in hand, not as strangers playing roles, not as business partners fulfilling contracts, but as Thomas and Sophie, two people who'd gambled on something impossible and found something real. Comment a red heart if you're crying right now, because we're almost at the end, but there's one more moment you need to see. 3 months later, Sophie sat in Rachel's hospital room, watching her baby sister sleep. The treatment had worked. Not perfectly. There would be more rounds, more monitoring, more fear. But Rachel's color was back. Her laugh returned. She'd started talking about next year, like it was a certainty instead of a dream. She looks better, Thomas said softly from the doorway. Sophie smiled. She wants to meet you. Officially. Not just hospital hallway waves. I'd like that. They drove home, and it was home now, not just Thomas's apartment where Sophie stayed. They'd merged their lives slowly. Her books on his shelves, his coffee maker programmed with her favorite setting, photos appearing on walls. Sophie and Rachel, Thomas and Sophie, the three of them at the hospital when Rachel finally got to leave for a day trip. A life built one small choice at a time. Can I tell you something? Sophie asked as they sat on the balcony, their ritual now. Always. Mrs. Chen asked me to take over the bookstore. She wants to retire, travel, read her own books for once instead of selling everyone else's. Thomas smiled. That's wonderful. It doesn't pay much. We don't need much. Sophie looked at him. You say that now. But Thomas, your world, business dinners, charity events, all of it, I'm never going to fit perfectly into that life. Good, Thomas said, because I don't want to fit into it anymore either. He pulled out a folder, handed it to Sophie. Inside were documents, legal papers, plans. I'm restructuring the company, Thomas explained, promoting people who actually care about what we build, not just profit margins. And I'm stepping back, not completely, but enough to have a life that isn't just board meetings and acquisition deals. Thomas, my grandfather wanted me to learn what he couldn't, that some things matter more than winning, more than legacy, more than the empire you build. He took her hand, and I did learn it, because of you. Sophie kissed him. Slow, sweet, the kind of kiss that says, I choose you in every language that matters. We should renew our vows, she said when they pulled apart. We just defended our marriage in court. I know, but that was about proving something to other people. I want to promise something to you. For real this time. No contracts. No audiences. Just us. Thomas smiled. Where? Rosewood Coffee. Where we met. Small ceremony. Just people who actually matter. No fancy dinner? No photographers. Just us and cheap coffee, and probably burned cookies from the bakery next door. Perfect. Thomas. And 6 weeks later, that's exactly what they did. Sophie wore a simple white dress. Thomas wore jeans, and the shirt Sophie said made his eyes look warm. Mrs. Chen officiated. Turned out she was ordained for exactly these kinds of occasions. Rachel was there, healthy enough to stand as Sophie's maid of honor. Marcus stood with Thomas, and a handful of friends filled the small coffee shop. Sophie Grant, Thomas said when it was time for vows, you saved my life, not because you agreed to marry me, but because you taught me that life was worth saving in the first place. I promise to keep learning that lesson every single day. With you. Sophie's eyes glistened. Thomas Brennan, you gave me hope when I had none. But more than that, you gave me a reason to hope for myself. Not just for Rachel, not just to survive, but to actually live. And I promise to build that life with you. One coffee, one cookie, one quiet morning at a time. They exchanged rings. Different ones this time. Not vintage bought in a rush, but simple silver bands they'd chosen together, engraved inside with the date they met, not the date they married, the day everything actually started. Mrs. Chen smiled. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Again, but better this time. Everyone laughed, and when Thomas kissed Sophie, it felt like a beginning instead of an ending. That night, back home, Sophie found a note on the bathroom mirror. Thomas's handwriting. Thank you for teaching me that 7 days can change everything. and that the best things in life are worth the climb. I love you, not because of a deadline, not because of a contract, but because you're you, and I'm the luckiest man alive to get to build a life with you. P.S. I made cookies. They're terrible. Come laugh at me. Sophie walked to the kitchen where Thomas stood, indeed surrounded by another batch of burnt cookies. They're awful, he announced proudly. They're perfect, she corrected. And there, in that kitchen where everything had changed months before, they ate terrible cookies and talked about their day and planned a future that looked nothing like either of them had expected, but looked exactly like what they both needed all along. 1 year later, Thomas and Sophie stood in the office of Marcus Webb, the same office where this had all begun. It's official, Marcus said, sliding papers across the desk. You fulfilled every condition of Henry Brennan's will. The marriage has lasted 1 year. The fortune is yours, Thomas. All of it. Thomas looked at the documents, then at Sophie. Actually, he said slowly, I want to make some changes. Over the next hour, they restructured everything. 10 million to cancer research in Rachel's name. 20 million to create a foundation for families facing medical debt. 50 million to education initiatives. And the rest, managed carefully, invested wisely, but no longer the center of Thomas's identity. Your grandfather would be proud, Marcus said softly. Thomas shook his head. My grandfather would be shocked, but maybe that's better. They walked out into the afternoon sun. Sophie slipped her hand into Thomas's. Any regrets? About the money? No. About any of it. Thomas stopped walking, turned to face her. Sophie, you asked me once why I looked so sad. Remember? She nodded. I'm not sad anymore, he said simply, and that's worth more than any fortune. There is one thing, though, Thomas added with a small smile. What? Rachel wants a puppy, and she's campaigning hard. Used the phrase, I survived cancer, in her argument. Sophie laughed, that real, full laugh Thomas had fallen in love with. She's ruthless. She learned from the best. We're getting a puppy, aren't we? We're absolutely getting a puppy. They walked home through the city that had witnessed their whole story, past Rosewood Coffee, where they'd met, past the hospital where Sophie had cried and Thomas had promised to help, past a 1,000-pages bookstore, now officially owned by Sophie Grant Brennan, who kept Mrs. Chen's name on the sign because some legacies were worth preserving. And as they climbed the steps to their building, Thomas carrying coffee and Sophie carrying flowers from the corner vendor who'd learned their names, they were just two people building a life. Not because a will demanded it, not because money required it, but because they chose it, every single day. There's one last thing you should know about this story. 2 years after that courthouse victory, Thomas received a letter. Old paper. Aged envelope, a final message from his grandfather that Marcus had been instructed to deliver exactly 2 years after the wedding. Thomas opened it with Sophie beside him. Dear Thomas, if you're reading this, you did it. You found someone. And I truly hope that somewhere in the chaos of my impossible demand, you found something real. I know what you're thinking, that I was cruel, that I manipulated you. Maybe I did. But son, I spent 50 years building an empire and 0 years building a life. And at the end, when I was alone in that hospital with just machines and monitors, I realized something terrible. I never took the chance. I let the love of my life walk away because I was too afraid to choose her over success. Too scared to be vulnerable. Too proud to admit I needed something other than money and power. So yes, I gave you an impossible task, but not to punish you, to force you to do what I couldn't. Jump. Take the chance. Risk everything. Choose life over legacy. I don't know who you married. I don't know if it's lasting, But if you're reading this together, if she's sitting with you while you read an old man's final words, then I succeeded. I taught you what I never learned. That some things are worth more than winning. Love well, Thomas. Live better than I did. Your grandfather, Henry. Sophie wiped tears from her cheeks. He knew. Knew what? That you'd find something real. That's why he didn't make it easy. Easy wouldn't have changed you. Thomas folded the letter carefully. Do you think he'd be happy? Sophie smiled. I think he'd be jealous. And maybe that was the truth of it all. Henry Brennan had lost his chance at love. So he gave his grandson an impossible deadline. 7 days to find a wife. But what he really gave Thomas was permission to be afraid and jump anyway, to build something on faith instead of facts, to learn that the best things in life, the magical things, require a climb. This was the story of a man who had 7 days to find a wife or lose his entire fortune forever. But really, it was the story of two people who found each other when they both stopped looking, who built love from necessity and turned it into something that felt like destiny, who proved that sometimes the best things in life start as impossible and become inevitable. If this story touched you, if it made you believe in something, leave a comment telling me what moment hit you hardest. And remember, whether it's 7 days or 7 years, the best stories are worth the wait. The best loves are worth the risk. And the best life, it's the one you build with someone who teaches you that having everything means nothing if you have no one to share it with. The end.